Hey guys, Stock Saturday, recorded on a Friday night, and rather a Friday it's been. Today has sort of pushed the portfolio on a fair bit from what was sort of a reasonably good week to a very, very profitable week. Up about 13.5%, which is 42,000 quid. Not something that I expected at all. Looking at the markets, the S&P is up 0.6%, so a little bit better than that, and the Nasdaq is down. So it's been a bit of a quiet week, although obviously tech has been sort of doing pretty well, not quite at the all-time highs. The S&P is sort of pushing all-time highs. Well, it looks like a new all-time high yet again today. So that is doing well, and I've been sort of underperforming, but yeah, this week has rather smashed it. It's sort of been very good for TSMC and some of the semiconductor stocks. They sort of got all knocked from fairly bad earnings from ASML and sort of brought back up again slightly with good earnings from TSMC. Had a little bit of a move from the Chinese tech and sort of Chinese stocks in general after sort of pulling back slightly. But yeah, sort of my process is still about 700 or 800 quid down from where it was. Still looking very profitable. Vanguard emerging markets sort of not doing too bad, nearer the sort of highs that I've had it. Sort of considering both of these still for maybe taking a little bit of profits to allocate elsewhere. And then Stellantis and Hymax both sort of had, middling to slightly rough weeks. Stellantis sort of still seems to be languishing, thinking there's a bit of too much competition going on. So speaking of TSMC, they had absolutely knockout earnings. Third quarter revenue at 23.5 billion US dollars. They had 22.4 to 23.2 on the guidance. So that looks good. Gross margin 57.8%. Again, sort of way higher than the 53.5 to 55.5. Operating margin similarly higher, and net profit 42.8%. So very, very strong. $325 billion in net profit compared to 247 billion just a quarter ago. And year over year, that is 54%. So rather nice. Looking at by technology, obviously 3 nanometer is rising up. Nothing sort of too dramatic. I guess this is Apple and Nvidia and people like that using the new 3 nanometer chips. But I would imagine a lot of this is just price rises and increased orders rather than a sort of particularly big shift to the higher margin stuff. I mean, you can see 7 nanometer is up a little bit since sort of the last few quarters. 5 nanometer actually dropping off a little, presumably to make way for this larger 3 nanometer segment. But yeah, revenue sort of overall on the up. HPC is high performance computing, sort of making up over 50% of that now, 51%, and that's 11% up quarter on quarter. Smartphones doing well, Internet of Things doing well, and then your sort of same slightly worse performers. Automotive still up, reasonably well. Sort of digital consumer products not doing particularly well. And finally, some recent major events. They've had their sort of joint venture between Bosch, Infineon, and TSMC in Dresden, Germany, breaking ground on the new fab. European Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, sort of awful roll off the tongue name, similar to Taiwan. Yeah, good news. Expanding into Europe, they're obviously expanding pretty heavily into the US to sort of reduce that China risk. And dividend, obviously, and Amcor and TSMC to expand their partnership for the Arizona fab. So customers for the new fab sort of pretty much as soon as it opens. So that's always good. Coming over to their balance sheet as well, cash sort of continues to keep trickling up to 1.8 trillion new Taiwan dollars. To compare it, they do put it in cash, $59 billion in cash, but they don't do the conversion, so I always just look at it in NTD. So yeah, up slightly from last quarter and up very strongly from September last year. So that's pretty good. Marketable financial instruments up as well. So you sort of stocks in other companies and sort of investments, long-term investments and things up. Property, plant and equipment down slightly. I expect that is sort of depreciation and various adjustments, but it's a very small adjustment. And yeah, bonds payable slightly down on the long-term bonds, and current portion of bonds slightly up, but take the two together and looks like you're down sort of about 10 billion new Taiwan dollars on the debt. So cash up, debt slightly down, so can't be bad. You can see from the income statement that this increase in profit is sort of just a combination, looks like, of increasing prices and slightly higher margin products, sort of switching to the 3 nanometer. Nvidia are presumably willing to pay whatever is necessary for the newest chips, and it seems like they can sort of sell as much as TSMC will give them. So that's always good. They've had sort of a little bit of delays, but yeah, the AI train continues rolling on. So you've had 85 billion new Taiwan dollars increase in revenue, and a 5 billion increase in cost of revenue. So it's basically not cost very much more at all. R&D sort of increasing slightly, sales general increasing slightly, but there's very little here. So it all just comes straight down to income from operations, straight down to profit before tax and net income. So yeah, very good results. Obviously, they're still spending an enormous amount of that profit on capex to expand into America and Europe, as we say, plus a little bit more in the home turf. You can see sort of 325 billion net profit and 207 billion cash flowing into property, plant and equipment for the quarter. In Taiwan dollars, that is. So, what is that? $18 billion for the last 9 months. Has been sort of higher than that in previous years, but yeah, they plough on. And you see a reasonable amount of that money going out in dividends, 259 billion in the last 9 months, 90 billion for the quarter out in dividends, $8 billion. And not much of any buybacks. You can see sort of on the balance sheet, 25 billion. Yeah, what is that? 25 billion shares. Pretty much all the way through. So they're not too keen on buybacks, which I don't mind really. I would rather, if they've got a high return investment that they can make in sort of the new fabs, then yeah, go for that. What are you really going to get from buybacks? If they're undervalued, they might get a bit of PE expansion, but I think the return is sort of far better there investing it in growth if the potential is there. And while they've got sort of pretty much all of the AI market share, Samsung and Intel don't really seem to have the sort of R&D spend and innovation to sort of compete with them, then you might as well carry on expanding. So despite the good week on gold and silver stocks, as well as crypto, we did take a bit of a knock on Equinox Gold. It's not sort of really performed for the week, and that was due to an update on the Greenstone mine, the newest Canada mine. So they've sort of said that things are ramping up and that it's going quite well, but they were sort of forecasting pretty much full speed for Q3, and that doesn't appear to have been the case. They're sort of saying things are ramping up. July they were doing 87,000 tons per day, 125,000 in September, and they got to 180,000 sort of at a peak in September. And sort of October to date, they are at 145,000, approaching a Q4 target of 170,000. And they sort of give you some details on all the trucks and, you know, some more details on processing. But then sort of, and it is up the top here, their estimate drop for production. But they sort of summarize all of this by saying the production guidance for Greenstone for this year was sort of, you know, midpoint between the two of these, 190,000 ounces, is now sort of midpoint 120,000 ounces. So the ramp up is happening a little bit slower than expected. They still expect it to get to top production, sort of 400,000 ounces a year next year, and yeah, it's just happening a little bit slower than expected. So the stock dropped about 7% on the news, but I saw this as, you know, still positive. Next year it looks like we should be hitting 900,000, maybe not a million ounces, but sort of certainly 900,000 ounces. And yeah, for the market cap, that still seems sort of some of the best value out there. So yeah, it's you know, took a little bit of a drop and sort of risen back up partly again today. And yeah, people are sort of digesting this lower production for 2024, but it was always kind of a 2025 and 2026, you know, longer term play. So I'm pretty happy. So in move that I have made, which you'll see in the ISA, in the sort of portfolio section, I've swapped half of my Fortuna mining position for Fresnillo. I sort of mentioned that I was looking at them for a little while, and Fortuna sort of has been underperforming Fresnillo for sort of a month or two, but they did just suddenly have a mad spike up today on the gold and silver rally today. Sort of silver has really spiked up over $2 today, and yeah, Fortuna seemed to be sort of, I didn't see any particular news that would have caused almost 10% rally today. So yeah, it sort of rocketed up on not a whole lot of news. They're not a silver producer, sort of as of next year pretty much. They're not going to be doing much silver at all, which is why they changed the name from Fortuna Silver Mines to Fortuna Mining. But yeah, they're sort of going to be basically gold, even though the ticker stays as FSM, Fortuna Mining. Yeah, you've got S in the ticker and not in the name anymore, but they can't change the ticker. So I decided to switch into Fresnillo, sort of being the largest silver producer in the world, 56.3 million ounces last year, and so far, first half of 2024, 28.2 million ounces. So I've sort of discussed them when I've been discussing KGHM. So I now hold the first and second, I believe, producer in the world. And yeah, they're in Mexico, which is sort of not the best, basically all in Mexico. I just don't believe that Mexico can sort of afford to get rid of them, which is sort of in the news, which I'll come back to. But yeah, Fresnillo do have a bit of gold production as well. 610,000 ounces last year. They've done 270,000 in the first half of this year. They're sort of projecting a bit of a better second half. It should be slightly down on last year, but not too much. And yeah, the resources are absolutely enormous. 2.2 billion ounces of silver and 37 million ounces of gold. Obviously, it takes a little bit of work to, get all of these into sort of profitably mineable resources, but yeah, they're certainly still there and in the ground. And they sort of highlight strong balance sheet as well. Fortuna sort of had their dilution to improve the balance sheet, but for Fresnillo's is pretty good anyway. No, they're saying 0.17 times net debt to EBITDA, so that's pretty good. Dividend, don't really care about, but yeah, EBITDA margins sort of rocketing up, and that is first half of 2024. Second half is obviously going to look significantly better than that. Yeah, they do give 2024 guidance as well. As I say, they're expecting a better second half of the year, 55 million to 62 million ounces of silver and 580 to 630 of gold. So expecting quite a strong second half of the year on the gold side. So yes, I do see this as, admittedly it has ran up a bit, but still a pretty good value gold and silver miner, especially on the silver side. You don't see a lot of these stocks having a high silver amount, really. You've got Pan American, which are sort of higher market cap than Fresnillo, and they sort of do a bit more gold, which is not, what the name suggests. And yeah, Fresnillo do quite significantly more silver. You've got Coeur Mining, my other sort of big play with the new acquisition. Sort of do almost half, or just over half the silver that Fresnillo do, and just over half the gold. And they are quite a bit over half the market cap. So again, not particularly good metrics there, although they are in slightly better jurisdictions. A bit less sort of in the Mexico, uncertainty. But yeah, I'm taking a gamble on this uncertainty. So recently, that has basically been coming from Mexico's presidential election, and the sort of idea their previous president was suggesting an outright ban on open pit mining, which would have sort of decimated a lot of their industry. There's an awful lot of mining of various metals in open pits in Mexico. They're not sort of particularly happy with it, but yeah, you would think this would trigger sort of a reasonably large recession if they were to just do a complete outright ban. It provides, an enormous amount of jobs and GDP. And yeah, Mexico have a new president, Claudia Sheinbaum, presumably butchered that. And yeah, she's come out with 100 pledges, which is sort of probably a little bit shotgun, scattergun approach. But the mining ban isn't in those 100 pledges. So if you're going to make 100, that is quite a lot. The mining ban was sort of quite a significant part of the previous president's sort of agenda, it seemed, and she was sort of hinting that she was going to carry on a lot of his policies. And yeah, if you're going to make 100 pledges and that isn't in it, I think it could be one of those PR things that, this just largely sort of drifts away into nothingness. She's not going to sort of come out and say, I don't believe in the mining ban, but this is the sort of PR way to do it. Basically, you just let it get forgotten about and drift away to nothingness. So take a look at a bit of economic news for the week. We did have quite a bit. Had some British job numbers, all looking remarkably good, to be honest. Claimant counts sort of slightly up, but nothing sort of too much. 27,000 unemployment claims, but unemployment rate, or that is claims for September, and unemployment rate for August, admittedly, but unemployment rate lower than expected. It was expected to stay the same. It's now 4%. And the unemployment change for is sort of our non-farm payrolls. 3-monthly for August was 373,000. Sort of expected to be a bit lower, 250,000 from 265 previously. So absolute knockout numbers. You do have obviously this slightly newer claimant count being a little bit higher, but I can't imagine that's anything sort of too concerning. You got average earnings at 3.8%, so yeah, looking rather strong. And then inflation, admittedly, again, this is September news, so maybe things are sort of starting to look down ever so slightly, but inflation quite a bit down. Whether this means, potential rate cuts are on the horizon now, where it sort of seemed like we maybe weren't going to. Could be 1.7% headline CPI and 3.2% on the core, looking pretty good. Monthly numbers incredibly low, flat on the headline CPI. So yeah, interesting on the UK. EU numbers sort of pretty much on track. Negative headline CPI, so that's interesting. US jobless claims, sort of again pretty much exactly on schedule. 240,000 initial claims, and sort of continuing claims dropping ever so slightly, having sort of risen a little bit, but can't see any hint of recession at the moment. And then we had UK retail sales, sort of pretty much knockout numbers, 4% on core retail sales and 3.9% on headline. So, and the monthlies were expected to be negative, and they were both 0.3% in the green. So everything looking strong on spending for the UK. Maybe we're all just spending on credit cards and extending ourselves. And you did have US. They keep doing this GDP now, sort of seemingly nearly every day. But that was 3.4%, and you can't have a recession at 3.4% GDP. So all looking good. So looking at the portfolio on the ISA side, it's looking rather strong. I believe this was at sort of 122,000 last week. So yeah, looking pretty nice. Clean Spark back up to 55,000 nearly. Coeur Mining sort of looking pretty strong, pushing 40 again. Equinox Gold, sort of, as I say, sort of took a bit of a knock, has risen, slightly back up. Right platforms pushing $10 potentially. Fortuna Mining sort of has done extremely well, as I say, 10.5%, which, gold has moved sort of 1%, silver's moved quite a bit, but they don't basically produce any silver sort of going forward. So, as I say, I took that opportunity to half that position and go half into Fresnillo. Depending on sort of what happens in the next few weeks, I may consider switching all of that. It'll still have the Mexico risk, but it's a fairly small position compared to things like Coeur Mining. So yeah, potentially living with that. And Hive Digital, we saw a rather large catch up, 15% on today, the Friday. So that's pushed me from in the red yesterday to 12% green. Interactive Brokers, Pan American looking pretty strong now, 24.40, and KGHM's not really moved too much. Might move on Monday with the silver move. And yeah, the Interactive Brokers account is going somewhat bananas. I have to keep reorganizing the order of these. Hive Digital is now on top again. I've been buying a little bit more, as is sort of every week, but that could be about the last of sort of what I'm buying potentially, depending on prices. Equinox sort of rising up a little bit, and something I have bought, sort of new for the week, is January 2027 calls for Equinox. These are at a $12.50 call strike price, rather than sort of the ones I have been buying all this time are $10. So it gives me another year, but I'm going for sort of basically slightly more than double from today's price. But yeah, I think it's 820 days to go. So all of next year and all of 2026 for that to run. Plenty of time for, the greenstone mine to really get into full swing and start sort of bringing the debt down, and get institutions start seeing quite a few quarters of good growth. So yeah, we'll see where they go. Riot, haven't bought any Riot this week, but that's really starting to, come good. 30% in the green now. That and Hive were sort of both in the red, I believe, last week. And yeah, Coeur Mining, I did take a small profit on Coeur Mining. I sold 3 of the contracts. It's still, doing pretty well. It's higher than it is last week, despite selling a little bit of that. And I did put that into Hive, I believe. Himax has come down slightly, Fortuna's up slightly, and these are sort of small fry positions. Core Scientific I do sort of keep there just to remind myself to check it, and it's starting to potentially see a little bit of underperformance with them sort of going very heavy on the AI. They're actually down for the week, which, considering the week we've had for crypto, Bitcoin's up about 9%, and sort of people like CleanSpark are up 30% for the week. So Core Scientific being down is maybe just that little bit of focus that as sort of Bitcoin price rises, their fixed price AI deal looks less and less attractive. So we'll have to see. Obviously they were underperforming on the downside of Bitcoin, but who knows? I might be putting a little bit more cash in, possibly if I do sell, possibly a bit of the Chinese stuff or sort of emerging markets. I've got about 2,500 that I can put in cash. So we'll see. Might be adding to some of these. Might buy a little bit more of the January 2027 Equinox. Give myself a bit of long-term gain. So leave your thoughts in comments below, and like and subscribe. See you soon.